On today's World Insight with Tian Wei, China's central bank on the brink of launching a digital currency. How will this revolutionize the monetary landscape in China and abroad? And we meet a scholar whose calling revolves around friendly China-US ties. How can people on both sides maintain the relationship? Here is our host, Tian Wei.
Hello and welcome to World Insight, coming to you live from Beijing on CGTN. We begin today's program with cryptocurrency from China. The People's Bank of China could become the world's first central bank to introduce its own digital currency. That is according to some media reports. Many say the proposed currency could encourage global use of China's yuan. But is that really the case? What's going to be the potential if there is a central bank digital currency? Before we get down to the discussion, let's take a look at this.
Is the world's first central bank digital currency around the corner? The People's Bank of China said it's speeding up the development of a legal digital currency. The central bank has applied for 74 patents involving digital currencies to the National Intellectual Property Administration. The soon-to-be unveiled digital currency will be backed by the reserves of valuable assets that the commercial institutions deposit in the central bank. At the initial stage, the new form of money is for domestic use only. In the future, it is intended to adopt the same exchange rate as physical money. Electronic payment has grown by leaps and bounds in recent years in China. Many believe China's proposed digital currency will sync up with other popular e-payment platforms like WeChat and Alipay. Meanwhile, some experts say this can become a mechanism used in everyday transactions all around the world, which could internationalize the RMB.
For more on the potential of a proposed cryptocurrency from China, we have in New York Jason Struhl, who is a senior analyst from the Multivariate Solutions. I hope I pronounced that name right. In Hong Kong, we are joined by Professor Xiao Geng, the president of the Hong Kong Institution for International Finance. Last but not least, Chu Chiang, assistant director from the International Monetary Institute at Renmin University of China, based in Beijing. Gentlemen, welcome to our program. Mr. Chu, according to media report, there is a potential China could issue the cryptocurrency, or shall we call the central bank digital currency. Now explain to us, what exactly does that complicated phrase really mean, Mr. Chu?
Well, I think the cryptocurrency, the name itself, actually can be a little bit confusing to most of people. Well, the only thing it is similar to what we know about cryptocurrency, it's just to use the cryptocurrency technology, so which has been protected by the all kinds of the passcode and crypto technology. But actually, this is nothing more just like a general RMB we're using in the daily days. I assume you probably use it, like WeChat Pay or the Alipay. Just consider this cryptocurrency just something we issued by the Central Bank of China and be used out of China in an international arena. That's something like that. But it's nothing to be similar with the Bitcoin or like some other things like that.
Is that also your take, Professor Xiao? Tell me more about your understanding. What's really the real essence of this concept, Professor Xiao?
Well, the central bank digital currency is a very powerful tool because it actually includes what we call smart contract capabilities, because it can trace a lot of the use of currency for both macro and micro transaction purposes. So and also it is built on the trust on the government, the sovereign government. So that, in that sense, is fundamentally different from the cryptocurrency, which does not really have the trust and also the enforcement capabilities.
Mr. Struhl, also go to you, your understandings here. According to the earlier two gentlemen, obviously there's a huge distinction between the so-called central bank digital currency, which China is on the verge of looking at and probably launching, we do not know the timetable, and a cryptocurrency. For example, Libra coming from the Facebook. Is it? Mr. Sproul.
Yes, they're definitely meaningfully differentiated. So cryptocurrencies are almost something of an unfortunate title because it conflates what their meaning behind them really is. They're simply just digital transference, something of value. It doesn't even have to be monetary. But the stalwarts of cryptocurrencies have been an immutability and a lack of any central governing power behind them, which is quite different than a central bank issued digital asset or something like Facebook's Libra, which is going to be backed by a cornucopia of different reserve currencies, or something like JP Morgan stablecoins. So these things are quite different vehicles in the sense that one is still just a sort of a digital extension of what we think of as a sort of sovereign central bank-backed fiat currency, whereas cryptocurrencies, when we think of Bitcoin and Ethereum, are really wholly different vehicles backed by this immutable hashed transaction.
Right. When you think about it, Professor Xiao, US dollar is one of the most fundamental currencies, shall I say, the most fundamental currency being used in our world today. Now, at a time of interesting change of the world, and China is thinking about the potential of a central bank digital currency, what is really lying behind the research and also the thinking and brainstorming process, Professor Xiao?
Well, I think what is important is that the digital currency issued by central bank is much easier to really trace all the uses of the currency. On the other hand, the US dollar, as it is, in paper form, actually there are a lot of things which you cannot trace. So that's why it's heavily used by for example, drug traffickers and also speculators. They kind of use it to avoid the monitoring by the regulators. So I think the use of central bank, sovereign government, issued digital currency is a leapfrog in terms of technology to really, reduce the risk of the use of the currency, particularly international reserve currency in the future.
Mr. Chu, also from you about that, it seems Professor Xiao is trying to suggest there's going to be an increased degree of security as a result of this. And there's also going to be an ultimate transparency, in fact, when it comes to transactions worldwide. So how do you see one side of this vis-a-vis the other side, apparently paradox, but actually very in line with one another? Mr. Chu.
Yes, I couldn't agree more with Professor Xiaogang. And by the way, we're graduated from the same school. It's quite a luck. Nice meeting him here.
It's not the intention to invite everyone from the same school, but it's great to trace back to the amaretto. Anyway,
yes,
go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, I think I agree with him on just two levels. First of all, when the currency goes international, there is a lose control situation happening there. America has faced this paradox already. For example, America issues a lot of greenback bills in all over the world, but very sadly, a lot of things have been used in trafficking, like drug trafficking, armed trafficking, and human trafficking even. So with this money, it's hard to trace them. So sometimes you can hardly to control them, and this kind of money will rewind back into your normal monetary channel, so disrupt your monetary system. So it's going to be a danger to infringe your monetary system. And when Chinese yuan is going internationalized, as currently we're doing now, we're second largest economy, is inevitable where our money is going to be internationalized. We're going to face the same situation. This is like a problem both America and China wouldn't want to see. In some other countries, if your currency is going to go international, you wouldn't want to see that. And secondly, we're going to see another problem is that we need transparent. We need transparent. When your currency goes out being used by all the people in the world, you need everybody to trust you. So what's this more trustworthy than the cryptocurrency? Bitcoin, well, been used in a lot of underground economy, but it's transparent. Everybody can see what's
Right.
going on. So only thing you have to take away is the anonymous in Bitcoin, and to make it to be a real name. Everybody can see who is trading with who, a company, a government. So everybody being on the literally on the same page. So it just be more trustworthy.
That is only one side of the story, the function of it, or shall we say the potential function of it. The other side of the story, Mr. Stroh, if I could go to you about it, is who will use it? I mean, that is going to be a very crucial question, isn't it? Once you have a technology available over there or a currency over there, it also has a lot to do with who will use it, Mr. Stroh. What do you think?
Absolutely. I mean, I think there's certainly something to be said for a currency that's backed by the central government that's still as transferable and fungible as a digital asset class that we're talking about. So it's plausible, given the popularity of mobile payments in China already and the interoperability with the existing platforms, it's certainly plausible with any central bank's influence that I would think the earliest adopters are going to be sort of sovereign, sort of Chinese nationals. And I believe the rumors so far have suggested that it's going to initially just be for a domestic use case. But certainly, as the global landscape changes and China's, the yuan status as a default trading currency potentially increases, this is a very good vehicle and mechanism with which to sort of internationalize that system. So for now, I think it's quite clear that just it would be a vehicle that's used on a consumer peer-to-peer level. There's a big security benefit from the central bank standpoint, which is that in the current mobile payment platforms, a huge amount of capital is siloed and kept in their proprietary systems, which is actually something of a security risk. With a central bank, even if the currency is compromised, they always have the ability to essentially, if it's digital, write a few more lines of code and produce more, and thereby ensure the security of the capital systems. So again, I think it would be domestic for now, but if we're talking about the increased internationalization of the yuan and perhaps the changing status of the dollar as a default currency, certainly I can see it becoming more of a tool for bank-to-bank monetary transfers, perhaps something that could eventually usurp the SWIFT network and things like that.
If you think about it, Professor Xiao, I mean, the Libra story. Now, it has been quite interesting, a roller coaster ride, as Facebook has been enjoying, quote unquote, over the past few months, to say the least. Obviously, that demonstrates how important it is for an issue of currency. That's sovereignty, right? That also means financial power. Now, if China is have a second option, which is a central bank digital currency, what does that mean for the other existing, or shall I even put it more bluntly, dominating currency in the world? Will the other side, quote unquote, feel threatened and therefore use all possibilities to prevent it from happening? Professor Xiao, I know you are not a geopolitical expert, but these are interesting questions related to the issue we're talking about here, Professor.
Well, I think for RMB, so far, the digitalization of the RMB is going to help China to really, do major progress in its current account convertibility. So in that sense, it is very, very important for the whole world, because when the RMB becomes convertible on most transactions, then the international trade and investment will be facilitated much better. I don't think in the short term, it's going to have any threat to other currencies, because this is just reducing the so-called transaction cost for the use of RMB. But in the future, I think something similar to the Libra could actually come out in the future, based on the experience of Chinese central bank digital currency, because it's just a step away from creating a digital currency packed to a basket of currencies from a single currencies. So actually, the experiments, the innovation in China is actually a very important step.
It's becoming ever more complicated and yet fascinating, I have to say, with all your explanations. Mr. Stroh, if I could come back to you. Now, if you look at the picture, there are several layers of it. There's so-called sovereignty countries, and the competition or cooperation among these economies when it comes to the currency regime. That's one thing. The other thing is there are multiple kinds of players, such as private institutions. Facebook is one of those examples with the Libra opportunity or maybe challenge, you name it. So there are several layers of things. So how should we seek out the real nature and potential of this central bank digital currency that could be in China's horizon compared to all the other different layers of this structure as we speak, Mr. Spool?
Sure. Perhaps to bring some clarity to it, we've really discussed three, what I see as distinct classifications of some sort of digital transference of values. Cryptocurrencies, as we've been referring to them, let's say Bitcoin, Ethereum, and the like, are really just served, in my view, to popularize the notion of a digital transference of value not necessarily tied to any underlying asset class. But they're very meaningfully differentiated because, again, they're immutable and there's no central governing body. Governments and central banks, therefore, are probably not terribly happy about any sort of ascension in their popularity because they can't be controlled, and there are all sorts of previously discussed problems when you have an uncontrolled and largely anonymous money supply. The other tier we're discussing is things like Facebook's Libra coin, JP Morgan's coin, other sort of stable coins, as we'll bucket them, are vehicles that are all pegged to an underlying fiat currency. In Facebook's case, I believe 50% is planned to be pegged to the dollar, with the rest made up of a smattering of other default global currencies. So those are quite different than a central bank currency in the sense that they're really just a mechanism to provide, to transfer value digitally, but they're designed for the value not to fluctuate. They're designed to be totally stable, but they are controlled by private institutions, and that does represent something of a threat, I would think, to central banks. Certainly, in my view, there's something to be said for sort of utilizing the same upsides that something like Libra might provide with the additional security of a central bank, and of course, from a country's perspective, having all the KYC, AML stuff baked into their own digital currency that they could create presents quite a big advantage. So I see it as a defensive measure against the potential popularity of something like Libra. There's sort of three distinct classes that I would bucket them into.
Yeah. If China go ahead with this experiment, Mr. Chu, what would that mean for the other economies who are facing one potential or another, or shall we say one challenge or of another kind? Mr. Chu.
Well, I think actually the media and other governments or other economies have ever, overread the situation. I think everybody should welcome this.
What do you mean by overrate the situation?
A lot of people saying China is going to use this new cryptocurrency to probably to try something new or to become a new universal currency. No, actually, it won't happen. Trust me, it won't happen. Let me tell you some basic economics.
Okay.
The reason why the human beings, all of our countries, have so many different currencies and we have to bother so many troubles to deal with the foreign exchanges with each other. Why? The basic reason is that we have different production efficiencies among different economies and regions. We produce things in different scales with different efficiencies. That's the reason why we need different currencies. So there's never going to be one currency to take over all the world. U.S. dollar never do that, sterling pounds never do that, so it won't happen. What we're talking about here is just a new way to transfer our international, monies. We used to use SWIFT assistance. That is a very stable and a good system. We have to say that, but it's expensive. Let me just remind you one fact. If one bank want to buy one machine just to record this transaction through the SWIFT code, we have to pay $50,000 US just to register one machine. That's right. It's very expensive. China is now trying to use a new way, a low-cost way, a more faster way to do so. I think you should be welcomed by all the other countries because your country deserves the same rights to do the same thing. China tried to be the first one to try the trouble, and if it works, American can do this, European Union can do this, and everybody can do this. We just will find a new way to transfer and exchange money between each other. That's a good news for all human beings.
Well, if it is that important, or if it is that much fun, Professor Xiao, many would ask, haven't other economies also thought about that? Would China be the first one to think about that, or at least to do that, or to try that? Why the others didn't, or shall we say they failed? Professor Xiao, you know better than I do. Please help us to understand better.
Well, I think China has an advantage in developing the central bank digital currency because the economy is so large and already people are using WeChat and Alipay. So most transactions in China actually already digitalized, right? So, but I think, in fact, China can reduce the transaction costs dramatically by using digital currency issued by central bank. But I think in terms of the national sovereign currency, most important thing is about the trust. So, so each country will continue to use their own currency, and even for international transactions, people will still want to choose because the different government are trusted differently by different group of people.
Right.
So ultimately, I think it's the nation states, reputation and stability. How people around the world trust that country. That determines whether the currency will become international reserve currency.
Yeah. Well, you sound like a great economist, Professor Xiao, because you're saying, on the one hand, let 100 flowers blossom. On the other hand, it is really the credibility that's going to eventually count. Is that what you're trying to say?
Yes, yeah. Yeah, it's actually a competition, on both efficiency and also on reputation, trust. Yeah.
Mr. Screw, you agree with that?
Yes, to an extent. I do think the telling metric is really if transaction costs can be significantly decreased internationally, and also there is something to be said for a first-to-market advantage here. What you were previously discussing about other countries having attempted this, we did actually see this with the Venezuelan petro. It was pegged to petroleum reserves, or supposedly, although it was never able to be proven. But there's definitely been attempts, albeit not terribly successful ones, for other nations that have played with this idea, and we're seeing rumblings now out of France and Germany, other EU zone countries, reacting to the news of the Libra and the speculated popularity of it. So I do think, I do agree with the assessment. The futurescape is hard to predict at this point. But it depends if it really is a mechanism that is safe and allows countries to trade internationally with far fewer transaction fees and with much greater degree of expediency versus existing channels like the SWIFT network. Then I do see this idea of central-backed currencies as just the next evolution of monetary transference. Maybe not something that will dramatically impact the day-to-day lives on the consumer level, because we already, as we've been explaining, we already sort of live in a world where the majority of transactions, certainly in China, are digital anyway. So from the average person's day-to-day perception, I think what's more meaningful is going to be sort of the back-end channels for how large sums of capital are transferred.
That's right. And it's obviously very interesting to see the new trend. Therefore, I want to ask the final question, and maybe we could make an analogy about this issue compared to the others so that our audience worldwide will have a better understanding of the nature of it. Mr. Chu, let me go to you. Some compare, issuing the central bank digital currency as driving vis-a-vis autonomous driving, or shall I say driverless cars. And even though it is not necessarily needed for now, certainly it's going to be a great trend that will bring a lot of potential. Do you think that's a comparison that we can do, Mr. Chu? Briefly.
Well, you can do that, but also it's not quite exact. I think definitely something worth trying now, and it's not urgent, but actually we should do it now.
Okay, Mr. Sproul, what do you think?
I think it's an interesting analogy. I mean, with the potential to disrupt with both is there. I think autonomous vehicles are going to be a much more brazen and stark difference to what we have today versus the ascension of these potential central bank-backed coins. Because again, I think the average person, the average Western and Asian consumer at this point is quite used to the idea of numbers on a screen versus a physically tangible sum of funds to disperse. So I do think it's potentially very disruptive and positive, but I also think it's just the next natural evolution of the monetary system.
All right, Professor Xiao, last words. We have 20 seconds left for you too.
Well, I think it's basically an upgrade in infrastructure, like a much faster highway. So that's the analogy.
All right.
From the traditional highway, now it's a much high speed, high quality highway.
Fascinating discussion. We'll see where things are going and where the wind is blowing. Thank you so much, Professor Xiao Geng, Mr. Xu Qiang, and last but not least, Jason Fu. Really appreciate it, gentlemen. Thank you.